Moriden Athluan.
Working from within, Moriden Stormcrown created distrust, hatred, and discord within the ranks of the mighty vampire army raised by the ancient bloodline of Clan Volkar.
Cursing the name of he who defeated them, these vampire hordes were driven back to the plains of oblivion.
And so we find ourselves thrown together once again, my friend. Almost as if one of us were looking for the other. But why would either of us do that?
To self-improvement and the training of long-ignored talents and abilities.
Even as he trained at the illustrious and fabled Mages' College of Winterhold, Moriden still continued to search for a solution to the continuing dragon attacks.
Spending his time, now, searching for answers among the countless tomes of the Arcanum Library, it would not be long before he was again called on to save all of Skyrim. Nay, all of
Is
Meridia
that where we left
from
off?
the grasping hands of power-mad mages.
Once again, the bards only tell you what they believe to be truth. They weren't there. They don't understand. You, though. You, of all people, need to understand. So let me tell you what the bards will not, what they cannot. Because the truth is not what the bards would have you believe. Evening Star, 4th Era, 201. Though the dream that had been partially to blame for me leaving the college was now dealt with, this encounter with the daedric prince reminded me that I had one other prince waiting on me to take action, and she was not one that you kept waiting for long if you had any choice. The fact that I had forgotten about her at all, even for a moment, would have been enough grounds for her to grind me into dust. Meridia is not one to treat lightly. Imagine every story you've heard about womenfolk who clung to their men overmuch, then triple it. Then, just for good measure, triple that. Now you understand somewhat Meridia. She does not think even remotely in mortal terms. To her, all things are absolute. Either you love her and remember her always, or you do not. Either you give her the proper respect at all times, or you do not. Do the former, and she will protect you in her own outlandish and destructive way. Forget for even an instant, however, and things will go badly for you. Thus I dared not wait any longer. Her beacon was in my pack, waiting to be brought back to Kilkreath, near Solitude. Just after dawn, having ridden in the small hours of the morning, I ascended the final stairs to her shrine. I placed her beacon on her statue, and that gave me what might be one of the greatest scares of my life. I am not a fan of heights. Or rather, I'm fine with being high, but the short and rather violent stop at the end of traversing those heights is where I have a problem. Perhaps Meridia knew this and chose to use it to put a scare in me, and if so, mission accomplished. Regardless of the reason, though, I suddenly found myself hovering a large distance over the landscape, and Meridia made her will known. Below, so very, very far below, in the ruins of her temple, a necromancer calling himself Malkorin has taken up residence. This is already an affront to Meridia, whose hatred of all things undead, and those who create them, knows no bounds. That he has also found her token, her artifact, and is using that to power his magics, is an offense that she will not tolerate. Meridia is nothing if not straightforward. I am to go into the temple, guide her light through a series of beacons within the temple to open it to my explorations, and then kill Malkorin, and take up the token myself to spread her influence. The first two will be of no moment, other than actually doing them. As for spreading her influence, well, I have no woman in my life and never intend to. She will just have to understand that. The initial portions of the temple showed clear evidence of necromantic activities. Corpses were everywhere, many of them still in heavy imperial armor, several of them drained dry of any fluids as well. Some might have looked at these and said to themselves, vampire, but having some personal experience with vampires, I know this is not how a vampiric victim would be left behind. Slow and careful was the mantra, but I did not encounter anything living, or undead, as I went into the depths. My first encounter of any kind, really, was with a beam of white light so concentrated I was afraid it might set fire to anything it touched. It fell from the ceiling at an angle, where it alighted on a small black pedestal. Drawing closer, I realized that the pedestal housed another of the white, gem-like beacons that I had transported here. Touching it, it rose on magical energies to more fully engulf itself in the bright beam of light, and in that moment, the light was bent and redirected. A new door opened, and I began to understand what Meridia had meant by using her guiding light. It seems this will show me the path downwards to Malkorin, and open any obstacle along the way as well. It was in the rooms following that I began to see the work of Malkorin. And I'm not sure if the things I'm seeing are the results of the worst in necromancy, or the best. The shades that are called up here are not the ghost-like apparitions that I am used to seeing, nor are they skeletons. In some ways, they remind me of the creatures that roamed the plains of the Soulcairn, but even that fails to adequately explain their appearance. Not ghosts, as I said before, more like a ghost that tried to take on flesh again, but had come just short of succeeding. Instead of flesh, they are draped in the black tar of a long-dead creature, putrid and decaying. More than most necromancers can call up, but far, far short of a resurrection either. At least they don't smell as bad as they look. In time, I left the lower chambers of the temple and emerged once again into the exterior. I was surprised to see the guiding light beam still very visible despite the bright sunshine. It was a short stay, however. It was only a few hundred feet before I was faced with a door that took me back into the darkened temple. The interior I entered was a single, massive room spanning multiple floors. Climbing to the top, I had to adjust several of the gem-like beacons, sending the guiding light across the room while eliminating a horde of the oily apparitions that Malkorin had left behind him for defense. It was a slow progression, as the things seemed to have a higher ability to notice me moving about than your average bandit or guardsman might. At last, though, I reached the highest point in the room and adjusted the final beacon. sending the light into yet another one that was mounted against the far wall. Below me, another door opened. Back on the lowest floor of the room, I sighed. Of course it would be back down there. One final beacon, though I have said that before, was aligned in the next room, and yet another door opened. This, I felt, was the final section of the temple, its sanctum, though Meridia did nothing to confirm this. Indeed, I was beginning to doubt it myself when I reached the door at the bottom of the stairwell and found only a scattered few of the risen apparitions in the room surrounding a still-living man. Malkorin, obviously. But would not a man such as he have kept his strongest minions around his own person for protection? Pride, I thought to myself, and loosed an arrow at the back of Malkorin's head. It pierced his neck just as it would have any other. The body fell, just like any other. It got back up again, and that was a bit out of the ordinary. Over the next 5 minutes, I put several more arrows into both the risen shade of Malkorin and his remaining minions. Most of them were not trouble. They had difficulty understanding that forcing them to approach me through a door made my bow fire much more accurate and powerful, and thus died quickly. Malkorin was still enough of a thinking creature that he tried using magic against me from range. Too bad the door limited his options on that front. So Malkorin has died twice today. And Meridia's token, the artifact blade Dawnbreaker, is now in my possession. Of course, it wasn't so easy as just taking the blade. Meridia does do at least one thing differently from every other prince. When she moves you, your world doesn't fade to black. It is instead drenched in light, so powerful that one is forced to close their eyes or be blinded by it. Such happened when I took up Dawnbreaker. When I was able to open my eyes, I found that she had decided to torture me with heights one more time, finding myself hovering high above the landscape once again. I wish I could recall her words, but I was more concerned with all the open air below me. What little I do recall had something to do with spreading her influence across Skyrim with Dawnbreaker. There might have been something about plants as well, but I'm not entirely sure how that would relate, so I'll put that down to my semi-panicked state of mind. A few moments later, and I was on the ground once again. Dawnbreaker in my hand. Since I was close to Solitude anyhow, and felt a desperate need to do something menial to restore my sense of sanity, I turned toward the museum. My sense of sanity was only further assaulted when I returned to Solitude. Just outside the gates of the museum, an old man, a beggar I had assumed, stopped me and asked for my help. Really, I had thought he was going to ask for a few septums, and had that been the case, I was more than willing to drop him the coin and go on my way. That, however, was not what he asked. Instead, he simply said that his master had abandoned him. I can relate. All I had to do was find his master, tell him that his servant was still waiting for him. Simple enough. Then he said his master was in the Blue Palace. Oh, fine, I've been there before. Nothing to be concerned over. And then his master wasn't visiting the Jarl, but someone far more important. This perked me up a little, as I wasn't aware that there was anyone more important than a Jarl in the hold at the moment. Oh, and his master is meeting with this person in the forbidden Pelagius wing of the palace. Now I began to get concerned. Nobody would want to go in there for any reason at all. None that would lead to any good, anyhow. Who was this man's master that... And then he handed me a hip bone and said that there would be no getting in there without it, and before I could speak a word more, he was off and gone, leaving me with a hip bone. And a lot of questions. I reached the gates to the museum, and for a solid minute I stood there. Part of me wanted to enter the museum, ignore the old man and his insane ramblings, and just get some work done, but the longer I stood there, the more the odd nature of the request and its various pieces kept eating at me. Plus, well, the chance to enter a section of the palace that hasn't been open in centuries did appeal to me. Who knew what might be in there? Curiosity won, and with a half-groan, half-roar at myself, I walked to the palace and met with Folk Firebeard. If anyone was going to let me in, it would be him. As I expected, he rejected the request outright at first, but when I laid out the story for him, he began nodding slowly. If something amiss was going on in the Pelagius wing, we needed to know about it soonest. He gave his consent eventually, although under the strict promise that I would bring nothing out with me. Not that he'll know if I did one way or the other, I think, but just to be careful, I allowed him to think I agreed without actually saying the words. The Pelagius wing was dark when I entered, and once I found a few candles and a lantern or two to lighten the place up, I was able to get a good look around. It is quickly apparent to me that nobody had been here. The dust lay thick on everything, and if someone had managed to get in here looking for a few quick items to take and be gone, most of the silverware I saw everywhere would have been long since gone. Then again, this was only the entrance area, and if people were getting in this way, someone would have noticed it long since. Which meant there had to be another way in, somewhere else in the wing. I went up the stairs, and as I did so, a premonition of dread started to fill me. I could feel something mounting, growing larger, a presence that I hadn't felt outside. Suddenly, I recalled an encounter from several days ago, a madwoman outside of Whiterun. "The master has gone, but Dervinin will find him. Dervinin should not have gone. Vacation is where the head is. That is what Dervinin told us about our master. He's cozy in his solitude." Not solitude meaning alone. Solitude, the city. The mad giving portents about events that seemed mad in themselves. And suddenly I knew the presence. It scared me in a way that Meridia or Boethia never could, because they at least were predictable. They at least were sane. Unlike Lord Sheogorath, whose presence had not mounted to a level that anyone could have denied. I turned to back out, but before I had taken 2 steps, I was no longer in the Pelagius wing. I had no idea where I was. By appearances, it was the middle of a dead forest in a clearing with a very strangely placed table. The table had many chairs about it, but only 2 people were speaking. It didn't take long to figure out who they were, and that means I am in far more trouble than I had thought I was. The first was Lord Sheogorath, as I'd expected. He identified the second as the Mad Emperor Pelagius III, which means that I can trust nothing that I see is what it appears to be. In a place defined by madness, nothing can be defined, and when the person defining that world is also mad and completely unpredictable as a result, you have no way to assure your own safety. There had to be some connections here, though. I had what I assumed to be Pelagius's hip bone. I had entered the Pelagius wing of the palace. Now here, Pelagius himself was present. Well, briefly. Sheogorath sent him, well, who knows where, after he expressed some bit of boredom at hearing one of the Lord's stories for the upteenth time. Which left just me and the Lord of Madness, alone in a forest by a feasting table. If I expected that a conversation with a demented daedra would enlighten me at all, I'd have been partially correct. Assuming I can trust a single thing he says as truth, Sheogorath agreed to return to his people just as soon as I figure out how to leave. He has also informed me, in a way that makes me wonder just how insane he really is, that we currently are occupying the brain of a mad, homicidally insane monarch. I am in the mind of Pelagius III. Sheogorath hasn't said so explicitly, nor really would I trust it if he had. But the key to this seems to be the staff he's handed me. His artifact staff, Wabberjack. The staff's abilities are not well known. Indeed, most of the stories about it seem to contradict themselves on a regular basis, making me wonder if it has a firmly established set of abilities at all. As for the Lord of Madness, he took a seat and settled in as if watching a show. For my part, a quick look around showed me 3 paths out from this central area. I picked one at random. When you can't rely on sense to guide you, any way at all is as good as the others. The road I chose came with a voice in my head, explaining more of Pelagius's early life, most particularly his mother. Depending on how it's told, she either wielded fear like a cleaver, or wielded a cleaver and made everyone afraid. Either way, and thinking on it, those are not mutually exclusive, she made it clear to her son Pelagius that danger was present everywhere, all the time, and could strike without warning or reason. The boy was basically made into a walking fear factory. Many of the old stories emphasize his paranoia during his life. Most, however, put it down to the circumstances surrounding the War of the Red Diamond and all the family betrayals that happened during it. Having Patema as a major player in that set of events likely made it easy to be afraid all the time, really. Eventually, I stumbled upon an arena where 2 Atronachs were fighting in the center. I was the only one on my side, and on the other I saw Pelagius and 2 of his bodyguards. According to Lord Sheogorath, all I had to do was use the Wabberjack to defeat my enemies, while they, on the other side, tried to do the same thing. I watched the fighting for some minutes. This was a mind plagued by madness, narrated by the very Lord of Madness himself. Nothing would be as straightforward and obvious as it seemed. Therefore, anything that seemed obvious was suspect, such as using the Wabberjack on the Atronachs below. The 2 were evenly matched, and the noise and magic that went between them were very distracting as I tried to figure out what exactly I was supposed to do. Distracting. Of course. There weren't anything to do with why I was here, just a loud and noisy distraction to keep me from understanding. If they weren't important, and I was suddenly certain that they weren't, then the only things left were Pelagius and his bodyguards. I pondered on this. What was it Sheogorath had said? That Pelagius had been taught that danger could come from anywhere at any time. I stopped cold. And, he had said, from anyone. Even the most trusted of his own people, like, say, his bodyguards. I charged up the staff and let loose a bolt of its chaos energy right at one of the bodyguards, and in a moment it and its companion had changed into wolves, who then attacked the form of Pelagius before my eyes. If, in a way, you could call what I saw the paranoiac elements of Pelagius, then I just saw his paranoia die. As for Sheogorath, he positively chortled in my ears. He'd wondered if I'd ever figure it out, it seemed. I turned and walked away from the scene. I had no need to watch someone, even an imaginary someone, get savaged by wolves. I had seen it before, after all. I continued around the edge of the clearing, in a counterclockwise direction because, why not, and started down a second path. As before, the voice of the Lord of Madness whispered in my ear, telling me more of the Mad King. Pelagius had a large number of things that he hated and feared. Something that I could relate to, really, as should all living, I would imagine. The difference is that Pelagius allowed these to turn to anger. Anger that he couldn't understand or use to control the things that he feared. In the normal course of things, we fear what we do not understand, and try to destroy that which we fear. In Pelagius's case, however, he turned that anger inward and destroyed himself with it. He lacked the confidence to do anything at all, held in thrall by his own anger. Here, in his mind, this is a literal thing, as I discovered some few moments later. Watching two versions of the same man, one beating the other to within an inch of his life, is not something anyone will forget seeing, I think. Again, Sheogorath gave me my instructions. With every hit, Pelagius's confidence will shrink, and his anger will grow. All I had to do was equalize the pair, make his confidence sufficient to match his anger, and the inner beatings would cease. Again, I could relate. I've done a fair number of things in the last months that I've questioned myself over, beaten myself up because of it. In the end, I made my peace with those choices. Pelagius, however, seems to need some assistance doing this. There were no other elements to what I was seeing, nothing to distract from the tableau that was laid out before me. There were really only two targets, a small version of Pelagius's confidence and self-worth, and a large version of Pelagius's anger and hatred. Confidence, I have learned from my own personal experience, can go a long way. I have accepted that I am going to be wrong about some things, and thus, though I may be wrong when I make a choice, I do so with some measure of confidence. The appearance that you know what you are doing is sometimes more important than that being true. So that is where I started, lobbing a ball of the chaos energy at the small version of Pelagius. He vanished immediately, which had me concerned for a few moments. After those moments, however, the anger version suddenly turned and chased toward the center of this clearing, where a more normal-sized version of Pelagius now stood. Alongside the anger, two more apparitions appeared, and all three attacked the new Pelagius. A second bolt of chaos, this time directed at the anger, call it an act of taking oneself to task, if you will, and the anger was suddenly dwarfed by the confidence. Again Sheogorath cackled in my ear, proclaiming that Pelagius was now ready to love himself and hate everyone else. I'm not sure that it is better than the previous state, honestly, but if it gets me closer to getting out of here alive, I will accept it. The final path was the path of dreams. However, as I noted recently, and was shown in a very real way, nightmares are also dreams. Vermina prepared me for that reality, and watching it take shape in Pelagius's mind in the form of night terrors didn't do much to make it seem less. The thing about dreams is that they are usually some kind of exaggeration, something from life taken, twisted into a dark version of itself, and then writ large in some frightening way. Given the life that young Pelagius had, it is easy to see that fear was the dominating influence in his life, and to find that it dominated his dreams as well should be no real surprise. The thing is, waking up from a nightmare should be simple. The terror itself is usually enough to do so. Yet the challenge that Sheogorath has given me is to wake him up, which immediately tells me that simply standing by and watching the fear take action will not be enough. How then to wake a person up from a nightmare when the nightmare itself no longer affects them so? With no other immediate targets to use the Wabbajack on, I threw a bolt of chaos at the sleeping Pelagius. Immediately, a wolf appeared and attacked me, prompting me to shoot the wolf with the wabberjack, which turned it into a goat. I had no idea how these two animals related to each other in Pelagius's mind, but the feel of the clearing seemed to calm slightly, somehow. I tried again. This time, a giant, muscle-bound bandit appeared and tried to chop the goat down. Not directly threatened this time, I waited a moment to see if something else might happen, but eventually shot the bandit as well, who turned into a young, child version of Pelagius. This made even less sense, unless Pelagius feared he was turning into a bully of some kind, which made no sense given what I knew of his confidence. Again. This time, a hagraven and a giant, both of which tried to kill the child Pelagius. The hagraven became a middle-aged woman, perhaps a tutor or nurse. Who knew where the giant went at all, for no other forms appeared? A fear of authority, perhaps, a result of his mother and her methods? Again. A flame Atronach dancing about the clearing, sending flame without direction everywhere. This turned into a campfire, where the young Pelagius and the older woman walked up to and began to warm themselves, as if enjoying a fire in the evening during a trip in the wilds. Again. This time a creature like the one I saw in the tomb recently, the one that had been wearing a mask with the word Otar on it. Another bout of magic being flung about, and then I hit it, and it turned into a treasure chest. Pelagius woke up. I have no idea what has really been shown to me, only that the calm brought by changing threats into things to be enjoyed has somehow woken the Mad King up. Honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted an explanation. I turned and left. I met back with the Prince of Madness, and with an almost disappointed sigh, said I had done what was asked. I was going back to Solitude, and he was going back to the Shivering Isles to see what his people had gotten up to while he'd been gone. Since Pelagius was now disgustingly sane, as he put it, there simply wasn't any more fun to be had here. He left me the wabberjack, no reason given, just had it shoved back into my hands, and then he set about making sure he was ready to depart. It occurred to me that if he hadn't wanted to leave, he wouldn't have given me the clues I needed to treat Pelagius. I get more the impression that he just needed an excuse to say the vacation was over. But then, when you are insane, do you really need a reason for anything? Another flash of light. When it vanished, I was back in the Pelagius wing of the palace, where, from the moon position I could see out of a window, it was near unto midnight. One day, 2 major daedric visitations, and though they seem coincidental, I cannot imagine that they are. Monsieur warned me that I would be of interest to the princes. Her warning was all too accurate. I left the palace as quickly as I could, bound for the safe house and sleep.